very much for the floor, and after that very interesting presentation, I have a challenge to follow with hopefully something also that will captivate you or interest you at the very least. So I'm Peteris Zilgalvis. I'm head of Unit for Startups and Innovation and the Digital Single Market Directorate, and also co-chair of the FinTech Task Force in the European Commission. And our Digital Single Market Director, we actually do have a e-commerce sector, and I think Yasmin Batista, who's the head of that, will be joining us during the breakfast. But so I'm going to give you a greater overview of the digital single market and how that impacts on innovation in mobile and digital retail. First of all, about the digital single market and then the midterm review, which is meant to enable sectors like e-commerce and digital retail in general. This was published on the 10th of May, as you may know, and it complements actions like the FinTech public consultation, which I and my co-chair Peter Kerstens from DG FISMA were responsible for, and which closed on at the end of June, and we had 226 responses. On the basis of that, we'll have a FinTech action plan, which will be making the aforementioned digital single market to capital markets union. So also to enable your sector, and there will be areas dealt with probably on the basis of the positive response in the public consultation, like standards and interoperability, issues to do with innovation like the regulatory sandboxes and work by the European supervisory authorities. So that's a little bit on the finance side. Also on this side, the midterm review said that we would be doing work on blockchain, which also has potential both for payments and for delivery of services in your sector. More broadly or less broadly, we will be ensuring, this is the Digital Single Market Midterm Review, that online platforms can continue to bring benefits to economy and our society while looking at some of the identified abuses that we see, especially in the platforms to business sector. Developing further the European data economy. So you've probably seen that the free flow of data regulatory proposal was tabled by the Commission 2 weeks ago. And this will make sure that you can utilize cloud services and move your data, especially if you're a multinational European enterprise, anywhere in the EU where it's useful for you. And finally, protecting Europe's assets by tackling cybersecurity challenges. This proposal was also tabled by the Commission 2 weeks ago. And this is, of course, something that you're all facing as well, as we see with some of the very famous hacks recently, including in North America with Equifax and so on. Trust in the e-commerce sector and more generally in the digital sector is essential. If we're looking very much at your sector, retail and wholesale services are key for the EU economy, we know. They're 11% of EU GDP and providing about 33 million jobs, 15% of total employment in the EU. As was mentioned by the preceding speaker, there is a great challenge. We see a strong opportunity to expand your customer base and your scope. At the same time, it's a challenge in terms of finding people with the requisite skills and for being able to provide the level of service that they require, while not cannibalizing, eating into your offline operations. And we know very much that this is a challenge. I mean, anecdotally, when in a nice part of France last year in Bretagne, we saw some nice products that some of my family members bought, and I thought, okay, we want to buy this again, and we contacted the seller. And they said, oh, we only sell in France. It's quite difficult to try to cover the whole European Union. I said, oh, why don't you just send it to Belgium? And it was possible in the end to arrange it, but it was exactly this capacity. But if you look at the possibility of scope, I mean, these kinds of things that are organic, etc., locally made in Europe, can definitely have a market well beyond just the single member country. But we understand that it is a great deal of a challenge for you. The DSM strategy, which I was mentioning, it reduces the barriers between countries and integrating the European market. We're looking to see how you can leverage the 510 million consumers, and then further, some of our champions can continue to compete globally. And we know that the market development, as I was saying, puts pressure on the bricks and mortar retailing. And for those that are embracing the digital revolution, You have to utilize this possibility to reach the new customers while at the same time dealing with the complexity of sometimes regulatory differences across the countries. So there's also a step forward being made. I mentioned the Free Flow of Data initiative, the regulatory proposal, but also it's already come into force, but the application of the data protection regulation in May of next year. This will have a unified set of rules in the entire EU, though it does require, if you're holding data on customers, having a data protection officer. If you're a large enterprise, there is a derogation for the startups, which we're also concerned with. Something else that you can make use of are the digital innovation hubs, which is part of our Digitizing European Industry initiative. And this is intended to help all sizes of enterprise, because some of you are also larger enterprises here. We certainly haven't forgotten you, but also SMEs and others who are interested in assistance in digitizing. And it's a network that we're investing 500 million euros in. Something else that is interesting and relevant is the Startups and Scale-Ups communication, which my unit was responsible for. And though it's called the Startups to Scale-Ups communication, it also applies to the larger enterprises, because one of the main policy lines is encouraging the collaboration between the corporates, the mid-caps, and the startups. And e-commerce and digital retail is obviously an area doing things like digital onboarding, linking to new customers. It might be something that in collaboration with a startup, or if you're a startup yourself, helping out the corporates in finding a more consumer-friendly or also multinational approach. I mean, all of us have started, or all of you have started in a national market, most likely, or several national markets, but the expertise to reach all of the 27 or 28 member states also might be residing in some startups, and the startups as well can benefit very much from your compliance culture, from your knowledge of the legal frameworks, and also your knowledge and application of cybersecurity. So it is something, though it's a little bit easy to say that it's a win-win, it's something that we see as a win-win. Finally, I will mention the platform to business trading practices, which I mentioned in the midterm review of the digital single market communication mentioned. And here the Commission has announced the follow-up action that, subject to an impact assessment, we will follow up on the finding that professional users of platforms face frequent problems with them, including delisting, discrimination, lack of transparency, and data access, which remain unresolved. And in fact, we had an exchange, a discussion, a lively discussion with Google last week in Silicon Valley when we were asking about that, and we were speaking with more or less the public relations people for Europe. But they're saying, oh, we make mistakes. And then, in fact, the answer from the Commission, well, it's not good enough to make mistakes. You do have to offer redress. So among other things, the Commission will look how to use its competition enforcement tools. But in order to reduce fragmentation, we want to prevent having custom specific national practices introduced everywhere. So I already mentioned that Yasmin Batista would be joining us, who's responsible for e-commerce and specifically for that sector, and so she's there now. And with that, hopefully that was a good overview of the different actions that we're undertaking in the digital single market, those who have already been published and those that are upcoming during 2017. As I said, we want to have very much a collaboration and ensure coherence with the policy for startups and scale-ups, with the upcoming FinTech Action Plan. And then I'll say a final word, because I think this will inevitably be a question that comes up. The PSD2, the Payment Services Directive 2 regulatory technical standard, the final draft has taken into account all the comments of the sector and the sectors. It's right now in inter-service consultation. It should be adopted by October, as you all know, with balancing of various interests, as is often in the case, because we have different both sectors and people on different ends of the transaction. In the end, it will be a bit of a compromise, but there has been a very extensive discussion with the different parties in the area, and we hope that the final outcome will be one that will help you to grow e-commerce and mobile retail in Europe. And as I mentioned, to have the next global champions in this area arising or continuing to grow from the European Union.
We hope so.